Welcome to another episode of the Frankly Leader podcast. This is one of the 4 bonus episodes from series 1, and I am absolutely ecstatic today to be introducing you to the fabulous JK. JK, welcome.
Hello.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited too and ecstatic to be able to have this conversation.
I am like beyond excited for this
Are
conversation.
we going to
So
hold it together, or is the
I
giddiness going to
think
get too much?
I think I'm going to fall apart. I'll just warn you now. It could get messy. So, for people that don't know you, JK runs a business called Where the Mind Grows, and she is a nature based coach and facilitator, as well as just being an all round good egg. And if I was having coaching, I would choose JK because she's fabulous. And
Oh,
not only is she fabulous, but she has an outdoor office. I mean, what's not to love about that?
exactly. It is pretty cool. And I do pinch myself sometimes when I'm sat, like, this week I'll be sat amongst the bluebells in the middle of the woods and just being like, how did I actually make this a reality? But I'm very grateful for that.
It is amazing. So, for people out there that might not know you yet, tell us a little bit about what it is that you do and why you love it.
Sure, thank you. So yeah, as Jennifer said, I'm a nature-based coach and facilitator, which is a fancy way of saying that I help people to reconnect with themselves and the natural world. And I work with teams and individuals of all shapes and sizes, but usually people that are really keen to make a positive impact on this fabulous natural world that we are part of, as well. So before I was self-employed, I was working in employability mental health services, both private, charitable. I worked in a medium secure psychiatric hospital as part of that career. And one of the things I saw was just like how amazing all the staff were that were providing such essential and vital community kind of led support services. And I was also noticing that we weren't too great in those kind of sectors at kind of keeping ourselves well. There's a lot of compassion and drive to support other people, but it sometimes was coming at the cost of great staff, and kind of worked alongside a number of people to create cultures and lead in and figure out what leadership meant that we could thrive, not just survive.
Yeah.
But eventually I was like, no, I need to break free. I want to kind of explore more. And I noticed that my world was becoming really separate from the natural world, which was just like, I've definitely got wildness in my heart. I need it for my mental health and well-being. So I break free and set up my original coaching business. And then in 2019, 2 years after that, I started taking people for walks out in nature. And then a random load of things happened, and now I'm in my 3rd year of delivering sessions at a little woodland in North Yorkshire called Little Seed Field as well. That's me.
Which is beautiful. I have been to I've been to see you and hang out there. I've been and done your co-working day there. I mean, it is fabulous, and I would encourage anyone who's looking for a retreat to get on. I don't know if you've got any spaces left for your next one,
I've
but
got a few spaces.
oh, so get on that and get yourself booked in for that retreat. It's very exciting. I love your story.
Thank you.
Putting it into the context of leadership, because this Frankly Leader podcast is aimed specifically at trying to help leaders to be the best they can be and not burn out while they're doing it. When you think about this is a big question.
That's okay.
The,
I like
the
meaty
biggest
questions.
challenges, we like these big meaty ones. The biggest challenge that's facing leaders, what's the one that you think leaders need to be most prepared for?
So I think for them, for like supporting their teams, I do think that it's change management. And I know that, again, that's like a vast kind of big heading in terms of it, but I think the complexity of what businesses are required to do in terms of change, because of that outer layer, the outer world, and kind of where we live in society and things, it's really fatiguing, and you don't have a cardboard cutout of needs and resilience levels within your team. It's always diverse, and that kind of push-pull factor of like each person needs to figure out their own approach to kind of manage change. For some people, work with trauma-informed practice. So for some people, change is massively derailing and
Yeah.
distracting. For others, they absolutely thrive in it, and it's where you see that, and kind of balancing that like leadership skill, I think is huge. And I think then coming back to leaders within themselves, is that complex. I think we don't recognize how complex that role is as a leader. Like, you literally don't have any one person the same. There's no one day the same. Like, you're constantly having to think at the present moment and also forward think as well, and learn from the past. You know, like, that
Yeah,
leadership has
yeah,
all of
yeah,
those views. And I think that just overstimulates our mind and our body. So without
yeah,
having like really proactive and varied like resources for, let's use the term well-being, but like people find their own term for that, whether it's vitality or like just feeling good or feeling successful. Like, I think it's calling on us to need such a layers of variety, and making space to understand ourselves, you know, and your leadership kind of style and needs in order to stay well, so that you can help other people figure out how they stay well as
yeah,
well. Because certainly, and I know we've kind of chatted on this before, but I often find that leaders think their responsibility is to help other people keep well, and it is to a degree, but that's not through them like expending their own selves. It's empowering people to be able to figure out what's going to work for them, and like having that open communication and psychological safety in order for that to kind of evolve through
yeah.
the changing climate.
Yeah, I love that. And that, particularly that message around how often we see organizations trying to squash people into processes and formulas and put kind of like containers around things and squash people into square boxes. And actually what you're saying, as I'm listening to you, and correct me if I've understood you wrong, that's no good, because we're all different, unique, whole being humans, which I love. And you've all got to have a container, but have it broad enough to contain the variety and the different contexts and the multi-layers that sit within us, because we're complex, aren't we, as human beings?
Exactly.
But
And
enough holding within that.
yeah, and that's why I love delivering sessions out in nature, because even in a woodland, there are so many examples of like adaptability, diversity, like different ways of doing
Yeah,
for a common cause. Like, and it's not just metaphor; it's like actual strategies for like, you know, standards of life.
yeah,
I'm and but it opens people's like eyes up to that discussion and how we might relate that kind of way of being and doing in workplace cultures and teams and leadership. Because like, I do strongly believe that everyone is a leader in their own right in some way, and yes, some people have leadership paid roles or like more responsibility as a result of their like status in an organization, but ultimately it's a collective co-leadership, isn't it? Someone's got to lead
yeah,
on something somewhere. There's no one that's kind of at the total effect of other people's decisions.
yeah, yeah, definitely. So if that's the biggest challenge that's facing them, what I'm asking on this podcast is for brilliant people like you to pick one tool that you think should go in leaders' toolkits. So what's the resource that you think leaders need to have in their toolkit that will help?
It's just going to be a bit too obvious. So it's to go out and be with nature, and notice that I use the word with rather than in. So I think that obviously the way that pace society has almost become transactional with nature, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, going into nature is a beneficial thing, but actually that sense of being with it as part of it,
Mm,
and it's really hard to actually tangibly describe how you do that, because I think it's a little bit different for everyone. But it's that relating to and valuing the like resets that it gives your mind and body. And the reason that for me is like integral to anything is because usually when a leader is overwhelmed or under pressure or a little bit just stuck with like, where do we go with this, or even freaking out because everything is fine and they're literally just
yeah.
waiting when everything's going to go wrong, because that is totally unnerving,
Tell
isn't
us
it, if
how
it's all suddenly gone okay. So all of that big spectrum of emotions, like, is that if we're in that busy cycle and are doing, and we're in our normal place, whether it's working from home or whether it's being in the office, that we have that repetitive state of being, and it might be really overstimulated. You might have a massive influx of cortisol and be stressed, and that is just not conducive with like creative problems like
Mm,
solving thinking that leaders need. And the cool thing about nature, and the thing I always joke about with coaching outside, is it just massively helps me to be a bit more of a lazy coach, because whereas I would have had to like private
Really hard.
session, help the person relax. Like by the time we've walked down to the woods, that neuroscience, that attention restoration theory, which is like 20 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes in nature, our body responds to it naturally. We relax, we reduce our cortisol, we boost all these dopamine and like all these cool like chemicals inside our body that enable us to be that clever thinker or that wise
Yeah.
person to
Yeah.
ourselves. And so for me, it's like when we know that that is part of our resource and that that will help us to get to maybe the problem solving or the solution quicker or more with more clarity or even inspired by the surrounds that we're looking in. That for me is an essential. And when I made that choice for myself, so when I was working as a leader, multiple projects, and I was really like starved of nature and I had a really
Mm.
stressful situation. I talk about it a lot on my blog and on my website and stuff. But it was the moment that I like noticed the trees, got out of the car and went and just like had that moment, and it was total clarity, and it was a moment of infectious resilience for myself.
Oh.
And I think that from the giving sharing that gift with other leaders, because
Mm.
though any leader is epic,
Yeah,
like
totally.
really, like so to be able to share that resource.
And I love that link between the emotional regulation that we need to cultivate to have that resilience. I think many people kind of go, oh God, that's another project, or I'll have to go to therapy, or I'll have to buy this tool, or sign up to that app, or whatever. And what you're saying here is like, no, like go out in nature and let nature do it for you. Like you can almost like let yourself off the hook from making another project out of it.
Yeah, exactly. And then, like, I'm not saying don't get the extra help. And as we both know, like, we've had our own experience of
Yeah.
coaching, and for me,
And therapy for me.
coaching, therapy, supervision, it's been a profound part of the recipe. There's no one thing, is there? Like, actually, we need a recipe of resources, and that's what makes resilience. It's not thinking one thing's going to fix everything. It's having multiple tools in your
Yeah.
kit bag. But at the same time, I think, and I often write about the fact that we seem to try and think that we've got to go for a hard solution because we're dealing with what feels like a really complex problem. And so we kind of poo-poo all of the like stuff that seems too simple. And I can speak about doing this for myself. The amount of times I've been like, no, that won't work. And then like with the nature stuff, like now I don't even hesitate. I'm like, I could go and stand on my doorstep and just listen to bird
Yeah.
song, and already
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, hang on a minute, I know what to say now, or I know what to
Yeah.
do now. So yeah, I think that it's about helping people who had that innate connection with nature, because a lot of the work that I do also speaks to an unspoken story that a lot of people have, is that you had that connection with nature as a child. It was
Yeah.
non-judgmental, it was a place of safety, it was a place of freedom. You've become an adult, you've at your career, and you kind of lost that, you've put it down, and there's almost like this shame and grief in this kind of dynamic as well. And so for some people, they're like in trepidation of what does it mean to reconnect with nature and reconnect with that part of themselves. But for other
Mm.
people, they just never have it. So they're like, what do I do? I
Yeah.
remember once I was doing a session with a team, and I was just like, everyone cool, everyone confident, need any more information? And this guy put his hand up and he was like, hi, am I proper townie? Like, what? What am I supposed to do? Because I'm up for it, but I haven't got a clue. And I was like, God,
Oh.
that's such a cool question.
Yeah.
And obviously, I gave some suggestions in terms of it, but it's like remembering that it hasn't always been accessible for everyone. So some of it comes with that amazing leadership tool of curiosity, to be open-minded to what might
Yeah.
happen, not really knowing what you're going to feel or what's going to change as a result of kind of immersing yourself in the natural world.
Yeah. And
Um,
having not being attached to an outcome, I
yes.
find trips people up quite a lot. They have an expectation that that the outcome will look a certain way, and sometimes the answer shows up in a quite unusual way, or the outcome is different to what they might have expected. So
Yeah.
a lot of letting go.
Totally. And I think, do you know, for leaders, that's a really like complex thing to do, because you're basically being told to be in control of the
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
And yet, actually, leaders who allow for some freedom and openness and control are probably the ones that have the most positive impact, because they disperse power, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
They are open to discovering new ways of being. They're not like stagnated in like being rigid. So yeah, like now I'm like, no, I shouldn't have said nature. I should have said openness. But I think they kind of come hand in hand, and just actually, a lot of people that I work with, and particularly in teams, say like one person said that they wouldn't have been able to have the conversation that they'd had, that we were doing like conflict resolution, and they'd said like we wouldn't have been able to have this conversation in four walls, like the physical space and
Yes,
openness
yes,
almost created like an airiness in being able to communicate openly with each other that
yeah,
felt safer than had it been if we'd been kind of stifled and stuck in
yeah.
their boardroom.
I used to do that when I was back when I was employed in a corporate job. I used to take my one-to-ones with my team outside, and we would do the walk side by side thing, which and it is great for like not feeling like you're
Yeah,
in some kind of like intense face-to-face one-to-one in a boxed
exactly.
room. It just creates so much more creativity and resourcefulness for everybody. And the fact that you're moving like
Yes,
almost tells your brain, oh, we can work something out because we're
exactly.
moving.
It's so cool, isn't it? I'm proper gonna geek out here because you're so right. Like the movement, massive. And again, like if leaders I feel stuck, like just taking themselves on a walk, like physical movement actually aids the body in terms of that. That stuff you were saying about side to side, perfect example of the fact we are actually animals, and eye to eye contact is quite intense,
Intense.
particularly when we're in conflict. So again, like it's I love it because it's like, oh, that's an animal part of us that we've like hacked out in terms of that. But I even notice, and it's really interesting, and it's more of an observational like thing that's come from practice, is we punctuate our issues, our challenges. So an example of that is like if someone gets stuck or they're talking about a stuck issue, they'll literally stop in their tracks on the walk,
Oh
they stop or they
yeah, yeah,
pause.
yeah,
Or if they're thinking about direction, they suddenly turn and like look a certain way. And
yeah,
over the time, I'm like, wow, this is so fascinating because in this space, we get to almost act out the movement that we want to create for ourselves in
yeah.
terms of the change that we want to lead
That's
into.
beautiful. I love that. I think one of the things I enjoy the most in my coaching practice that's just resonated with is the be in the mirror to someone. It's like just going, did you notice what just you just did then? But what I love about what we're talking about here in terms of nature is there's your wisdom as the coach and what you're noticing and observing as the big picture, but there's also what nature is mirroring back in terms of their
Hugely,
experience of being with it. So it's like a
hugely.
multi-layered kind of feedback loop.
And it goes really deep, and I obviously say like nature's my teammate as a co-facilitator, and I like really
Yeah.
believe that, as woo woo as it sounds, because I've got clients who, particularly on like my more immersive sessions, I sit by the fire and I go, we have a coaching question, and they go off and wander around, and it might be 20 minutes, it might be 45 minutes, and then they come back, I'm still sat by the fire, and they tell me all of the things that they've discovered, whether it's metaphor, whether it's I
No.
observed this, whether it's that they sat and replenished their internal system and that gave them that thinking space for insight, or whether it's just like, oh my gosh, JK, I've seen a deer, and like playfulness and excitement that's really invigorating for people as well. So like, yeah, it's like one of the things that I practice is eco psychology, and actually what that talks about is that we have this innate connection with nature, and that we will find meaning and purpose in the unspoken of what we interact with in the landscape. And it's really quite counterintuitive as a coach, particularly in leadership, because it's actually about me standing back, and that's where the facilitator steps in. So we might use a coaching prompt, or they might bring a leadership tool that they already have, but the true interaction and the meaning making and unpacking happens between them and the natural world, which
Yeah, I
again
love that.
sounds woo woo, but when you experience it, it just totally makes kind of sense, and the
Yeah.
neuroscience behind it is really interesting.
Well, there is a kind of woo-woo element to it because there's that energetic, we're all connected thing. But there's also, just on a really practical level, I think, listening to you, it's the gift of space.
Yes.
Well, particularly for
Oh,
leaders, I think like the
beautiful.
thing that most of them don't do is give themselves enough, carve out the pause button and enough space for them to reflect.
Yeah,
And that is the most easiest way. Pick a good coaching question, go for a walk.
yeah,
Like, what's the biggest challenge you're facing at the moment in your leadership role? Put a question to it. Go for a walk.
Yeah,
ideally in
and
nature.
you're so right. I mean, that's one of my retreats is called Somewhere, and that's came off the back of a leadership client saying to me, "JK, what I need is somewhere to be, somewhere to think." And I was
Somewhere,
like, "Do you know
yeah.
what? I'm going to create somewhere." And I
Yeah.
call my retreat that. But you're so right. That space, and space happens in lots of different dimensions, doesn't it? It's
Yeah,
happening in
yeah,
physical, it's happening in like an emotional regulation, but also the space to use our mind in a different way, like to reset it and respond and gain new perspectives in terms of things as well, which in its perspective, as we
yeah,
both know, like that's so powerful in leadership, to be able to change and shift perspective, to see things
yeah.
differently and find solutions. And I think you're so right, like that physical space then almost is like a spiral effect of accessing those other forms of spaces that are so helpful.
So, given the topic we're talking about nature, why do you think it should matter to leaders today? What are those challenges that you think doing more of this will help them overcome?
Yeah, I mean, this is a vast question, isn't it? And as you say, we've
A long, long,
covered
long,
some of
long,
it.
long, long list.
So I think, if it's okay, I'll speak to like both people and planet well-being in
Yeah,
there, because
please do.
obviously we both are in that space, and we're really kind of mindful that the leaders that we are aspiring to help develop now are leaders that can take us into the future of what leadership needs. And
Yeah,
I think we're all pretty mostly kind of confident with the fact that climate is now a conversation that potentially leaders need to be considering in terms of what the impact is on their businesses, on the roles, and the roles of the future, on financial stability and what's happening in kind of the wider climate. So leadership has become political in quite a few ways in terms of that, as well. So I think, remind me of a question, because I've gone on from my high horse.
what are the challenges that leaders might be facing that doing this will help them overcome? And
Yes.
you said we'll talk
So
about it from leader and the planet perspective.
yeah. So in terms of the planet, because I can feel myself getting on a soapbox, so thank you for bringing me back to that. I don't mean to in any way, but I think what I've seen that's really interesting with taking teams out into nature with through the guise of like well-being and personal development, which is obviously the area that I go through, reconnecting and having a relationship with nature for yourself, is those pro-environmental behaviors, that interest in what does it mean to be a leader that leads for good, that leads for the health of the planet as well as the team or the business, all that kind of stuff. That almost like grows naturally because you have this relationship with nature, you care, you start to think about, oh my gosh, like actually the natural world provides pretty much everything we eat, own, use, like we start thinking about that. So it starts to shift and actually ignite some really amazing capabilities and innovation in leaders when we start to
Mm,
think that way. And then in terms of people, I think, we live in an over switched on, overwhelmed world. I mean, I'm currently devising a set of coaching resources because my client need around switching off and like
mm,
removing themselves from screen time has become so prevalent as a discussion in coaching that I'm kind of developing some resources around that. But because we're so full of information, like that is not an optimized way for
no,
managing and performing and developing future leaders, and all those kind of things. So
yeah,
I think, as we've talked about earlier, like that nature fix is really helpful. It's a quick win in terms of getting your team out to access innovative thinking, emotional reset, giving them space to kind of grow their own ideas, create psychological safety, as we talked about before. But it's also fun, and it brings like that playfulness. Like you think like
yeah,
some of the big organizations have like rooms for play because they know that it helps innovation, and then you get a team in nature, and I'll turn around like someone's climbing a tree and someone's built a den, and I haven't asked them to do any of this. We're supposed to be doing conflict resolution. And sometimes that will be the thing that they need to do. So I think that that's the way I feel that these challenges, and as I said before, like the change management stuff, it's the pace of stuff that people are
mm,
really like fatigued by and confused by. And we've got some real shifts in terms of like what the different needs of like your employees are, depending on age, background, diversity, all those kind of things. But it kind of softens a lot of that complexity. I know, you know, I'm lucky. I have an office which is a woodland. I get that that's like a massively privilege. And I know that for people, it's like, well, how do we make it accessible if you're an organisation that's remote or something like that? So I think encouraging people to find their own relationships with nature, if you've got internal comms, you know, like encouraging that activity out in nature. Instead of having your screens on Zoom where no one puts their camera on and you wonder why you all feel disconnected, like just invite everyone to log on Teams or whatever, cameras off, and go for a stroll if it's safe to do it, and they can kind of focus in a safe way and help them to like replenish themselves that way. But there's loads of way we can invite nature in to help ourselves and our business.
So if there was one tip, I mean, you've already given us about 20 tips, but if there was one tip that you're like, do you know what, if you're like new to this, or you think, oh, I've disconnected, I want to get back into this, what's your one tip, your one takeout for people?
So this might be a bit of a curveball because I'm not actually going to mention nature.
Oh.
Well, the thing that I've seen is the most profound thing, and the thing that leaders think they can't do, but that I see that really dynamic leaders are learning or have enabled themselves to do, is name the emotion. So that I think that, and name it with your hand on your heart and your hand on your belly, and like the compassion for yourself, that it needs to be honoured. Because I think there's this like false pretense in leadership. I think there's lots of movements that are challenging it, that forgets that we're human feeling beings.
Yeah.
And that actually it's okay that if you've had a tough day, or things are overwhelming, or you've got aspirations for how to lead and your resources don't enable that for you, that you're going to feel a bit rubbish at times, or stressed or anxious, or life stuff might go on, you know. Like I can remember after my dad dies, I was like going in leading because it's the one consistent thing. I was still really great at it, but could I remember the code for the door lock? No. I had to pick another leader up each day because I had the total mind blip. But like, you know, we leaders have things kind of going on, and I think this rejection of our true self, like our true felt self, is actually quite a toxic trait in leadership. And I know from leaders that I've worked with and leaders that I've spoke to, that those people that just go, oh, that's anxiety, and then figure out like, well, what's helpful for anxiety? Do I know what that resource is, or do I need to seek that out so I can be more resilient? That's a much more effective way of leading than to think that you've got to hold everything together. And I know that I'm not saying like turn up to your team and be like fully authentic about every single emotion that you ever feel. Yeah, but actually if you're owning it for yourself and then you're proactive with it, because I think that a lot of the prolonged well-being issues or the burnout kind of comes from, oh, it'll be better tomorrow, or it'll be different tomorrow, or I'll just ignore that, or that doesn't matter, or I'm not important because these people have got it worse. And when we take ownership of and name what the feeling is, there's a great guy called Dr. Mark Brackett. His book's Permission to Feel. I think we've talked about it before. And he's got this technique.
He studies emotions. I love that he studies emotions.
Yeah, but it's so powerful because obviously his focus is on children, but like it's so relevant to like adults, and he's really clever at that. And that really technique, which if you're interested and you want to learn how to like emotionally regulate, like this naming, this recognizing and naming process that helps us to understand our emotions, is just so powerful. So yes, like the part in nature will help. That is a really quiet, non-judgmental space where you can own and figure some of those emotions out, and that's what I love about it. But I think that step to be able to find those resources, you know, to think, oh yeah, I need time for my well-being or personal development, often comes when people are, whether you want to call it brave or courageous or wise to themselves, and go, I'm just going to get rid of the shame of the fact that I feel all these feelings, because, you know, we have the ability to feel all these feelings because they're useful and purposeful. If they weren't supposed to be there, we wouldn't have the chemical compounds that make up the emotional states, would we? So for me, it's just like, it's all feedback. It's all really useful feedback that can help us to lead better.
I love that. I've just read in more popular culture, I've just read the new Mel Robbins book, The Let Them Theory. And one of the things she says in that, which I thought was hilarious and worrying and in equal measures, was that so the whole book is about getting triggered by things and trying to not get triggered by other people and just take responsibility for what's yours. And what she says is that for most people, like 95% of the population of adults, we're basically 8-year-olds running around in adult bodies because we were never taught to emotionally self-regulate and to self-nurture. We were, there was a lot of that, like, I can't even say it, stiff upper lip and keep calm and carry on, and
the whole
oh,
good girl stuff we've talked
good
about
girl, good
before.
boy, be perfect, fit in, be a people pleaser. I mean, there's a whole list we could get to in there, and how that just gets in the way of that authenticity, and not to become dramatic about it, but just to take responsibility in a really adult way for what's going on for us.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good example of it, because particularly when we are, if you've experienced trauma, then like that's kind of it on steroids, isn't it?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
particularly if the trauma was when you were
yeah,
young, then that experience is that. And I always say to clients, like, would you let an 8-year-old choose your life decisions as a like 30, 40, 50-year-old?
yeah,
No, and I'm like, well, that's what's happening now.
yeah.
But
Hello.
that's also terrifying. Like, an 8-year-old in
Yeah,
an adult's world as well, is a
yeah,
really scary place to be, and we wonder why, like, that emotional imprinting feels so strong for ourselves, but it is because of those responses in terms of
yeah.
that, and because the pace in which we have to try and process is like not enough time for a lot of learning styles and leadership styles as well, I think.
Yeah. And I'm coming full circle back to where we started, which was in that, that leaders really need to be able to navigate change management, but in a more emergent way, not a
Yeah,
boxed in way. And
yeah.
I'm thinking about the old life I had in corporate, where it was good if you were a thinking person. Oh, I just promised I wasn't going to do this ever again, and I've just done it.
At
I've
least
done
you did it
it.
on the right thing. I love it when people use it and it's not the right.
Damn it. Oh, I can't remember what I was saying. Oh, yeah. So if you were a thinking person, like,
Yeah,
thinking people, very welcome. Feelings, get them outside. Like, oh, she's dramatic, or oh, he's eruptive or aggressive, rather than, well, actually, there's wisdom in those feelings. And what I love in the kind of like full circle moment that's come around is when we're thinking about that emergent change management space. Yes, you want to know what you think about it. Yes, you want hard data, but you also want sensing skills.
yeah,
And people who know how to kind of connect to their feelings and can name them, like, without having to analyze them or unpack them, that sometimes that can shift a whole room or a process, can't it?
yeah.
Without needing to know intellectually what it means.
Totally. And I think, I know obviously you and I are very passionate about the coaching space for leaders, not just being because we're women that we offer it to women, and we both
Yeah,
coach like
men
really
as
amazing
well.
men.
Yeah,
And I think it's really easy for us to say, you know, lean into the trope of like, oh, well, men don't know how to talk about feelings. But as we've discussed before, it's not that they don't know how to talk about the feelings, it's just that there hasn't been a space in which they can label them. And
mm,
then just like female, non-binary counterparts, like, actually, where's the psychological safety that says it's okay for me as a leader, whether it's an internal labeling and then doing something about it, or an external labeling with my own manager or leader or a family friend or a coach, like, that's actually a really big step. And I
yeah,
think that what I've found with male leaders is that, like, I'm gonna get again on my high horse, they're so emotionally intelligent,
super,
and they're
super levels of.
given a space in which it's okay to talk, to like express those things, and it doesn't
Yeah,
need to be lots of wordy words like share our
yeah,
feelings and kind of all that kind of stuff, but to actually say, this is the thing, how do I fix it, or how do I sort it, what do I need to do, how do I stop it from coming out of control. And like, just how much of a buffer a lot of them have absorbed, particularly, in those like purpose-driven spaces where they're supporting lots of staff who really, really
yeah,
care about the work that they do and are in a
yeah,
high pressure, high stress, high risk environment. So I think this kind of, I call it like the rewilding ourselves, because it's
mm,
actually understanding our inner self. It's not, rewilding for me is not just about like, let's get everyone out into nature and they'll feel good. For me, it's much more about that kind of soulful leadership, as you were
yeah,
saying, like understanding that we have these stories, we have these complex emotions that we kind of move through multiply, and they might be relating to stuff now, personal stuff, life stuff, combination of things. But we're not saying make leadership therapy. We're saying, that actually this is just a really powerful resource that can help
Yeah.
people to shift
Yeah.
themselves through things, and open, again, returning to that space of being able to focus on what they want to do, which is lead well.
Yeah. It's about real leadership, isn't it? It's not therapy, you're right, but it's about being real,
Yeah,
being honest, having integrity with yourself, with others. You just make me think about Martha Beck. She has her concept of finding your own North Star, and she talks about you have your essential self and your social self, and the social self is the part of you that you think you should be
yeah,
out there in the world, and your essential self is kind of like your true nature. And
yeah,
in some of what I was just listening to you say, I was like, oh yeah, it's like coming back to what am I all about? What is my, if I was free to just be myself and not give a hoot what anybody else thought of me, like what more would I be bringing out of that? And I
yeah,
actually think leaders who can tap into little pockets of that, they give other people freedom to bring more of their whole self as well. And I think that's such a
yeah.
gift in the workplace.
It is, and I think it's a real, like, it mitigates risk, because when people aren't hiding, we're not
Yeah,
saying go out, say everything that you want
yeah,
to say, kind of thing. There's still rules kind of within that. But when people aren't hiding themselves, or they're not shameful or fearful of showing up as themselves, like like really good stuff actually happens in teams, as
yeah,
we've both observed. And I think that with even just my own practice and kind of becoming a coach, and obviously, I'm sure there'll be people that are leaders that have set up their own businesses like us, and like that's a bold move in itself. Like, that's leading yourself as a leader. Like, this
yeah,
it's the
yeah,
whole other
yeah,
layer of
yeah.
leadership, isn't it?
And
But
stress.
I, as I mentioned before, like, I now am in a space where, I can be sat on my laptop in the woods, tethering my phone, because I'm not poo-pooing technology. Technology is
Yeah,
great, it enables me to do that, to run my business and be out in the woods. And with deer and stoat and owls and all those kind of things, and feeling replenished in myself, so that I know that for those clients that have more stuff going on, that have more traumatic or
mhm,
challenging issues, it helps me to stay well, in
yeah,
order to
yeah,
kind of be there, as a coach alongside them. And so making leadership choices for ourselves, like self leadership choices, is like quite a significantly profound part of our own leadership, isn't it? It's like,
yeah, yeah,
I've slowly over the years, like, gone, no, I'm going to do less online stuff, or it's going to be more seasonal. I'm going to, up my days at the woods, all those kind of things. And it comes with some bold steps, because you're kind of stepping into the unknown. You're like,
yeah,
like, if I have another day at the woods and pay the rent for that, like,
yeah,
will people be able to come? Are they too
yeah,
busy, and all that kind of stuff? But I think, yeah, that's it. I love the concept of self leadership. Of, like, actually, yes, we have support mechanisms around us, we have things we can learn, ways that we can develop, but that inner wild is like, if we're true to that, you're just going to be going in the right direction, even if it's like massively wibbly wobbly and it has kind of like spirals and all that kind of stuff. You will be in your right
yeah,
direction, in your, like, North Star as well.
yeah. You find your center quicker. You can weeble back to your center, can't you, quicker?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I love
also,
that.
how awful, like, leaders out there, like, you will know this, when you compromise yourself,
Oh,
like, that is the single, like, hottest, scariest, like, confusing, like, it's all the emotions, isn't it? All the
yeah,
ones you don't want to have.
yeah, yeah.
it,
Because it
it
can feel like abuse.
it
You know,
really
on
can.
one
That's
level, it
such
can
a good
feel like
description.
abuse of self,
Yeah.
and there's some responsibility taken in that, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, people might overlook that, and
Yeah,
how simple it is to get out, like, get into it,
yeah,
and
yeah,
how complicated it can feel to get
yeah,
out of it. And, it is actually fairly simple to get out of it with the right support, as we both
yeah,
know. But I think when you're in that space and it's so uncomfortable, and, as you say, so, like, self-abusive in a lot of ways, that it is overwhelming.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
again, it comes back to name the feeling, and then we'll find you the way to
Yeah.
get back
Find your
to
way
it.
home. Well, JK, I've absolutely loved this conversation. I feel like we could go on and on and on for
No.
days. And I love the fact that we've been in the container of nature and we've meandered around in the forest of emotional resilience. It just feels
Beautiful. I
like
love
we've
it.
got
Keep
this
going.
gorgeous path I've been on with you, and I've been immersed in something. So yeah, it's been fabulous. I will make sure that all your links to get in touch with you
Yeah.
are added to the podcast so people can find you. But all I want to say is from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for making the time and sharing your wisdom with not just me, but the people that are going to listen to this as well. And it's
And
the
well,
world's a better place for having you in it.
thank you for bringing this to life, because I
No,
wouldn't be here if you wouldn't here as well. So let's just
no.
should we just gush at each other
Yeah,
for the
let's just
next
gush.
5
Let's just
minutes?
gush.
Like everyone that's listening to this, like just spend 5 minutes gushing with the person next to you now. That can be like the positive energy that we bring to the end of this.
Little appreciative inquiry going on.
Exactly, exactly. No, thank you. It's been so lovely to
It
chat
has.
with you, and I hope that it helps leaders to just feel a little less kind of alone and more connected
Yeah,
with things
I'm
as well.
sure it will. Thank you.